have you ever had a moment that completely changed the course of your life, and you maybe didn't recognise it for what it was at the time? It was 2018, the 30th of October, and I was trying to get my kids to sleep at night. At the time, I had a couple of toddlers, and I just got them down, and I thought they were about out, but I knew with that instinct of a parent that if I shifted my weight off the bed, they were going to be awake again in seconds. So I did what any self-respecting parent would do, and I flicked out my phone, and I thought, I'll just catch up with the news for 5 or 10 minutes and make sure they're really down. And I read a headline in The Guardian that really stopped me in my tracks. That headline was that since 1970, 60% of animal populations have been destroyed by humanity. I couldn't believe it. The Guardian's a great newspaper, it's normally absolutely dead on, but there was no way that this could possibly be accurate. So I checked the primary sources, and of course they were accurate. We have destroyed 60% of animal populations as of 5 years ago. It's probably a lot worse now. And I thought to myself, I was born in 1972. That means that effectively, over the course of my lifetime, we've created this swathe of destruction in other species. And I felt this sense of anger and injustice that had never occurred to me before. I wasn't someone that had any involvement in environmental and green issues. I was what I considered to be a normal person at that point. And I had a really strong feeling that someone, somewhere, should be doing something about this. Now that moment changed the course of my life, and I really didn't recognise it at the time. And I didn't change much right from the get-go, but what I started doing was reading every article I could about biodiversity loss, about pollution, whether it's water pollution or air pollution or plastic pollution. I read about climate change, and as someone who went through the Gillard years completely not getting the point of the carbon tax, I suddenly understood just how huge an issue that was. And I began to see how huge and interconnected all of these issues were. And I began to see that there was a common culprit for very many of them, which of course is fossil fuels. And somewhere over the course of the next 5 years, I morphed from being someone who thought that somebody else should be doing something about this, to, like most of you in this audience, being someone that did something about this. Now, at the same time that I was going through this personal journey and turning into a climate activist by night, I began to see increasing connections between what was obsessing me in my spare time and my day job. I'm a medical specialist, and my area of expertise is young onset dementia. I'm privileged to diagnose, treat, and walk through the journey of people diagnosed with dementia like Alzheimer's, frontotemporal, Lewy body. I love my job. And I'm often asked by my patients, why did this happen to me? And the truth is that for all of them, I can't give them a definite answer. I don't know why you got the disease and not you or you and you, unless it's very strongly genetic, which it very rarely is. But what we've understood over the past 20 years is that a huge proportion of human disease is coming from air pollution. We know this is true for dementia, for cancer, for heart disease, so all of our biggest killers. We also recognise that it's true for emphysema, asthma, osteoporosis, diabetes, kidney disease, stroke, infertility and miscarriage. Do you know anyone who's been affected by any of these illnesses? Not only does air pollution cause a dreadful toll in illness in humans, it's responsible for 1 in 5 of all human deaths. And the biggest preventable cause of air pollution is fossil fuels. We now know in 2023 that the annual toll from fossil fuel air pollution is roughly equivalent to the annual toll of cigarette smoking in the human population. That's how much fossil fuel air pollution is affecting the length of our lives and how healthy we are in our lives. If only that was the worst of fossil fuel impact on human health. But in fact, every medical organisation I can think of, including the World Health Organisation, the Australian Medical Association, and the Royal College of Physicians, of which I'm a member, recognises that fossil fuels actually pose an even bigger threat to human health, and that's through climate change, which is recognised by all of us as being the single biggest threat to human health in the 21st century. If you're watching the news just now, we're seeing these dreadful heat waves happening in the USA, in Europe, in China, and Japan. Records are breaking all over the place, on land and sea, Arctic and Antarctic, and we know that there's worse yet to come this Northern Hemisphere summer. We know that heat waves are very dramatically bad for human health. Anytime there's a heat wave, our emergency departments are swamped with patients. Heart attacks increase, strokes, kidney failure, lung disease, miscarriages, even suicide goes up when there's a heat wave. This has a dramatic impact on human health. We believe we're probably going into an El Nino year in this coming summer in Australia. We're going to see the same toll on our health as what's currently happening in Europe just now. And of course, I'm talking about all these first world countries. Clearly worse will be happening in the third world, but of course we don't talk much about them, do we? They're the silent people, and that's all about climate justice, of course. But it's not just heat waves, it's also bushfires, and dreadful wildfires are currently happening across Canada, across Greece, and across Spain. We've had our own experience with this with the 2019-2020 bushfires, where we watched as millions of people on the East Coast were exposed to the most toxic air in the world. Hundreds of people died directly, thousands were hospitalised and later died because of the wood smoke pollution that came from those bushfires. Again, I'm afraid of what we're going to see later this year, if it does turn out to be an El Nino year, and what's to come in the future. In the longer term, we know that our dry areas like Western Australia are getting drier. We know that our wet areas like New South Wales and Queensland are getting wetter, hence the floods, the repeated floods in places like Lismore. We know that these extreme weather events and increased temperatures are compromising agriculture, and what's happening is that crop yields are declining. And that combination of increased temperature, extreme weather events, food insecurity is going to cause, by mid-century, 1 billion climate refugees. That's 20 times the number of refugees we currently have. Good luck stopping the boats at that point. And why should we when we're such a big part of the problem? Medical doctors recognise that climate change is the single biggest threat to human health this century. The connection between air pollution and climate change is fossil fuels, which is what we're all here today to take a stand against. Now, I was asked also to talk about climate justice, and as doctors, we understand that practically for any given illness or health threat, there are several groups of humans who are much more susceptible to health impacts. Those are the elderly, children, the poor, the marginalised, in this country, Aboriginal Australians, and people with pre-existing health conditions. Now, I'm going to tell you a very personal story here. I've been talking about these groups for literally decades as a medical doctor, and as someone who's been completely healthy, it's never touched me in the same way up until 2 months ago when I was personally diagnosed with cancer. Now, I'm a lifelong non-smoker. I live a fairly healthy lifestyle for a 50-year-old, and I don't have a family history. And I sat with my oncologist and I asked the question of her that I had been asked so many times as a medical specialist: why did this happen to me? And she said, Carolyn, I don't know. And I took a big breath in and a big breath out, breathing air that we know is compromised with impurities from fossil fuel combustion. And I said to her, I think I do. You can't talk about climate justice and the victims of fossil fuel air pollution and climate change without acknowledging the fact that the people who are going to suffer most are people that have had the least to do with it. So the poor, children, and we can't have just a purely Australia-centric viewpoint. We have to think about the people in the third world who have done nothing to contribute to this problem, and yet will bear the brunt of it, while we here in Australia fiddle while their countries burn. And of course, we must talk about the villains of the piece. Chevron, Santos, her own Woodside, Impex, and the whole horrible motley crew of these fossil fuel companies who are recklessly indifferent to human suffering in pursuit of the last possible cent of profit. And hence we have these plans for massive fossil fuel expansion, fracking in our beautiful Kimberley Cannon Basin, and that abortion that is the Barrett Hub project. In 2018, I read in a newspaper article that changed the course of my life. My kids then were toddlers. They're now in school, and the urgency I feel today is far greater than I did then. It's 2023. We can't let these companies win. Back then, I was outraged by seeing species extinctions affecting animals. The species we're fighting for now is our own. I'm here today representing Doctors for the Environment Australia, and there are quite a few of my colleagues here in the audience. I'm proud to stand with CCWA and call for Western Australia to go beyond gas.